Welcome to the Exponential Edge podcast with your host, Arya Salur. I'm excited to have you join me on this journey, exploring the forefront of technological advancements and innovation that will shape our future. As a junior at Acton-Boxborough Regional High School in Massachusetts and the CEO of SecArmor, a cybersecurity startup, I'm fascinated by the transformative power of technology. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into 5 key areas that are poised for exponential growth in the next decade. We'll be exploring the realms of cybersecurity, generative AI, sustainability and climate tech, biotech and human longevity, as well as the reshoring of manufacturing. And we'll also go over rising startups disrupting the marketplace. These topics and businesses hold immense potential to revolutionize our world and redefine the way we live, work, and interact. Each episode will feature insightful conversations with experts, thought leaders, and visionaries who are at the forefront of these fields. In just 30 minutes, our goal is to provide you with 5 signature nuggets of wisdom from our guests. These key takeaways will empower you with knowledge and help you stay ahead in an ever-evolving technological landscape. Without further ado, let's introduce our guest for this week. Hi everyone. Our guest today is Todd Achilles, co-founder of Veterans for Idaho Voters. Hi, Todd.
Hey, Arya. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well.
Happy Thanksgiving.
And happy Thanksgiving to you, yeah.
Thanks. So, first off, do you think you could just give us a brief summary of your career thus far?
Yeah, I started off in the military after college. I had a scholarship and then got into the wireless industry and basically spent 20 plus years in the wireless industry on both the network side and on the devices side, and then after that shifted back to the public sector with a focus on public policy.
All right, thanks. And so your education, first you went to University of Washington grade school, and later got a master's degree in UC Berkeley in public affairs. So how have these academic experiences shaped your approach to overall leadership and decision making?
Yeah, I went back to Utah for grad school after the Army, and I did a double degree, an MBA and a master's in international studies, and I sort of migrated to doing a fair amount in international business, and then when I sort of shifted out of the private sector back into the public sector is when I did that MBA at Berkeley. And I think, the academic foundation is important because that kind of provides that intellectual framework as you look at big problems, whether those are business problems or problems of the public good. It doesn't provide the answers, but it does really provide the framework to how to look at and solve those problems.
And talking about your experience in the Army, you were a tank platoon leader in Fort Stewart, Georgia, right? And how has your military service influenced your career path and personal development? As it's obviously a huge difference from working in the tech industry.
Yeah, with anything else, there's sort of goods and bads and pros and cons with the experience. For me, it was first of all, the Army paid for college, so that made that possible. So I'm really grateful for that. But serving 3 years on active duty was a great experience. I mean, it's as a kid from the Northwest, stationed down in Georgia, it was my first time living in that part of the country, seeing really the full diversity of the U.S. in a way where somebody from Oregon doesn't see it, the experience of being a platoon leader, leading troops, and all of that comes with that. It was an important experience. 3 years was just right. I was not somebody who's going to make the military career, but those 3 years were invaluable.
And you were in Kuwait also during that time, 92, 95.
Yeah. We were the only rapid deployment tank unit, so we would do rotations through Kuwait, basically just kind of security missions together with the Kuwaiti Army. My first rotation there, I was actually attached to a Kuwaiti Army unit, a mech infantry unit. And so my four tanks and the Kuwaiti BMPs, we would be rolling around the desert together. Great experience. I really enjoyed working with them. They ate much better than we did. The meals were great. And then the second deployment we did was back in '94, I think, when Saddam Hussein sort of kind of threatened to invade Kuwait again. And so we hustled over there and spent a couple months in the desert, making sure that didn't happen.
Yep. And finally, for your experiences in the Army, what are the most important lessons that you still hold today? What's affected your career?
You know what? There's an expression in the Army about being, for all leaders, both officers and non-commissioned officers, about being technically and tactically proficient is the term, which is basically a very Army way to say make sure you know what you're doing and be able to lead by example. And so I think that's throughout my career I've always tried to be understand technically what's going on with a product, and understand the business as well as anybody.
Mm-hmm. And then you transitioned to the tech industry, got some high-profile jobs with T-Mobile, and you were the president of the Americas division at HTC during their Android handheld era. So, can you talk about your transition to a completely different field and your experiences and how both of these areas complemented each other, if there are any?
Yeah, I think what's great about the tech industry is just the pace of change and innovation, and how you're constantly learning. And what I got into the wireless industry in part because when I got out of the military, I didn't have a whole lot of skills other than I knew how the radios work, and the radios were sort of precursors of 2G networks. So I was able to talk my way into a job at T-Mobile in the early days. I just had a great run there, and this is the time when the wireless industry was just exploding. So it was I just got lucky, a great opportunity there to move forward, move from just sort of the original wireless data networks to the early smartphones, and then ultimately running one of the global business units at Hewlett Packard. So it was a great run. Did a lot of really cool stuff, innovative products, and worked with just some phenomenal people. I really enjoyed it.
You think you could go into detail about HTC in particular? Because I know they make VR now, which is a complete stray away from what you were doing when you worked there.
Yeah. So I first met HTC when one of my jobs at T-Mobile was managing our handset portfolio, and I was just incredibly impressed. It's a small Taiwanese company that was very just a disciplined engineering organization, cranking out these really cool, sort of the first generation of smartphones. And all of the research I'd been doing at T-Mobile pointed to this being the direction where everybody was going to go. This was going to become the primary compute device for Americans. So they were looking for somebody to run their business in the Americas. I raised my hand. It was just insane. I was the second employee. We had an office with like no desks or chairs or anything. It was so early on, and we just really grew the business, working with mobile operators in North America and South America. It just had a great run, and then that early transition to Android was really when things just blew up, and it was clear that this was going to be the device to sort of end all devices.
But you didn't just work on that technical aspect of it. You had to kind of build that America division from the ground up. How many people did you have when you left working?
Over 2 years, we grew it from, I was employee number 2. So we grew it to probably, north of 100, maybe close to 150 employees across the Americas, engineering, sales, and marketing, and everything else.
That's awesome. Yeah. And then after you talked about HP, after HP, I believe you started a startup that wanted to make sports media affordable and accessible. It's called Evoca TV. So could you just go into your inspiration for that, any challenges you faced in this startup, and how you planned on making sports broadcasting more accessible to the public?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So Evoca the business concept came out actually of some of the academic work I had done at Berkeley in the MPA program, and it's really looking at how do you address the needs of underserved markets. I live in Idaho, where a lot of small towns around here that don't have good quality service. Um, are there new technologies out there that help you close that service gap? And so what the underlying technology for Avaca is that the FCC has adopted this new TV standard called ATSC 3.0. It's basically 5G meets sort of old school TV. And it's really one of the most impressive technologies out there. But the TV industry is kind of sleepy and closed and protected, and they really weren't innovating. So we decided to go in and create this totally new TV distribution architecture that was oriented towards mid and small markets that typically don't have competitive services. And so over 5 years, we raised over $30 million. We developed what is, the world's highest capacity broadcast system, the first hybrid broadcast system, which means it combined over the air with streaming connections. We had the only 4K channel over the air in the US. And so we built out this network. And our big challenge, though, was that we couldn't get content. So that the media industry is highly concentrated now. And basically the big four media companies, ABC, Disney, CBS, Comcast, NBC, and Fox, just refused to do business with us because they thought we would cause negative disruption on their business models. And so we focused on sports because that was the area where there was still some independent content still available that we could build a value proposition around. So in markets like Colorado and Oregon, we were growing as fast as we could. We had this great service. But ultimately, because of how closed this network is and sort of this oligopolistic structure, we decided that it just wasn't going to work. So our investors, we shut the business down commercially. All the technology, everything we developed went to the investors. And we're just going to have to wait for a better time to bring something like this to market.
I know it's tough because you need people to actually watch the programs, and many people only do that with high-profile sports like football or basketball. But those big four companies just hold all the rights to them.
Yeah, they do, and it makes it 85% of the sports is owned by those big four. 83% of the Hispanic programming, about 80% of kids programming. So it's really hard to have a service that has broad appeal. But we got lucky, like in Colorado, we had all the pro teams. We created these dedicated channels for local universities, and it was a really compelling service. It was a lot of fun.
Do you think there's any sector where that technology could work?
The architecture is applicable. It was a TV centered architecture, so it's really focused on that part of the economy. But I think the technology is there, the standard is there. There's some really good stuff to build on, but it's going to take a shift in, I think, the commercial structure of the industry to be able to innovate there.
Okay, thanks. And so after that, you also returned to UC Berkeley and became a lecturer for public policy. And that must have been a unique experience as well. So how is teaching public policy to students influence your perspective on that subject? And what do you hope your students take away from your classes?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I actually did Avaca and teaching at Berkeley concurrently. Berkeley is just a phenomenal institution. I think being able to contribute to public universities is just a unique opportunity. Public universities are, I think, sort of the height of democracy. This is incredible investment that the public makes to the public, right? And that is sort of how we, I think, continue to make our society healthy, and we learn more and we move things forward. Within the public policy realm, obviously I'm the only one there that's got a tech background, and I spent most of my time in the public sector. So I really try and focus on that intersection between business and policy. And what that means was the particular focus on underserved markets. as we rely more and more on the public sector or the private sector to deliver services, the economics just don't work in these underserved markets. And so where does policy drive the business model to make sure that everybody has equal access to these key services upon which we depend?
And yeah, that gets me into my next question, which is the intersection of public policy and tech and business. So you think you could just expand a little more on that intersection? What's the role of shaping the future with public policy and technology? And what trends or changes do you anticipate in this intersection?
Yeah. This is an incredibly exciting time for how we think about this interaction between public policy and business. Ultimately, business and markets, they're policy constructs, right? This idea
Yep.
of a free market. Free markets don't exist. Everything from how you create a business to how we enforce contracts, copyright, patents, bankruptcy, all of this are defined in policy. So we create these markets. For the last 40 years, basically since Carter and Reagan, we've been rolling back the government oversight of markets, and that created, I think, this wave of innovation in the 80s and 90s. But the pendulum has really swung too far to where we are now, which is a few highly concentrated business sectors. Incomes, basically below the top 1%, incomes have shrunk, and it's not the sort of that's not the kind of healthy, balanced, democratic society that we want in the U.S. So now the role is how does policy take a more aggressive role to reinstill competition and create some balance back in the U.S. economy? So there's just a ton of stuff going on. It's super exciting.
Yep. And do you think that has to do with some of the privacy concerns that these big tech companies that kind of control a bunch of American platforms?
Yeah, very much. And particularly in the internet, Internet 1.0 was this sort of early experiment with lightning regulation that worked great. So Web 2.0, we rolled back regulatory structures even more, gave those companies more protection, like the Digital Millennium Act and Section 230. But now we've realized we rolled it back way too far. So as we're into this period now about who controls data and an individual's right to privacy, and how do we put some guardrails around AI so that it doesn't sort of become a platform to undermine democracy and sort of trust in government. These are all the big questions we're grappling with now.
Like now, Apple doesn't even give access to iMessages to the FBI or police.
Yeah, and Apple's a really interesting one. Been doing some work on the semiconductor industry. They're both the biggest buyer of semiconductors and one of the biggest fabless semiconductor makers in the world. They just have tremendous power over the industry, and these are the sorts of things where Apple kind of believes it. Fine, if you look at it from their perspective, what drives their business, you understand why they don't want to open this up. But from a policy standpoint, from a public good standpoint, you look at it and say, well, I get it, but that's still not an acceptable answer.
And kind of a personal question, how did it feel going back to your school, what was it, 20, 25 years after you graduated, and then teaching those same kids? What was it like going back there?
Oh no, it's a blast. Listen, I love that learning environment. I try and create that in my classes. When you go back, you're older than half your professors. That's kind of humbling too.
Was the environment kind of the same as when you were there, or did it change?
Yeah, Berkeley is a unique institution, as are all public universities. I mean, they just have an incredibly important role to what we want to create as a country.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So, coming to today, recently you founded Veterans for Idaho Voters. And what are your primary goals with this organization? How do you hope to impact both the lives of veterans and the wider voting public?
Yeah, so I co-founded this with several other veterans here in Idaho, and we are a cross-partisan organization. So we're focused on fair elections, the citizen initiative, sensible policies, and civil politics. And what's really important, cross-partisan means that we are Republicans, Independents, and Democrats working together. Just like we did during our service days. So we're just very disciplined about focusing on kind of civics and policies rather than politics and candidates. But we formed this organization to support in Idaho an initiative that we have to open our primaries. So about a decade ago, Idaho closed its primaries. And this is a trifecta Republican state. The Republicans control both houses and the governorship. And so when primaries are closed, that means just people from that party can participate in that primary. And what happens is, basically, think about it as a fraction. You reduce the denominator, so only people that are affiliated with a party can vote in that party primary. And then, because primaries have really low turnout, fewer and fewer people participate, are actually voters. And what that means is you just need a few votes in the numerator to get elected. And as a result, we've got a big problem in Idaho where we've got effectively fringe politicians with extremist ideologies backed by out-of-state dark money that have really rigged our elections and hijacked our state house. So what's happening in the state house doesn't reflect, the values of Idaho voters. Mm-hmm. So this is why we're pushing for open primaries and to put in place a system called instant runoff, a top 4 instant runoff, also called ranked choice voting, which will just bring competition and accountability back to our politics.
And how's it going so far? I know you guys started only in April of this year, right?
Yeah, we had. Let's just put it this way: a lot of the politicians that are in power right now, thanks to this closed primary system, don't want to see changes. So we had to sue the Attorney General. The Supreme Court supported us unanimously. Idaho actually has one of the toughest initiative process. So we have to get 6% of Idaho voters to sign the petition. We're about 27% ahead of plan. Idahoans do not like what's happening, so they want to see this on the ballot, and things are going really well on this. But it's going to be a fight. Those folks that have closed off the electoral system over the last decade are not going to go quietly. Yeah. So we're gearing up for a big fight.
Did you have to bring awareness to the citizens of Idaho on this subject, or do you think a lot of people knew, they just didn't know what they could do to help?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, I think in general, Idahoans are frustrated with the political process. They know it's not working like it should. That we get sucked into these divisive topics rather than just focusing on, kitchen table issues that just make Idaho work better.
Nice. And finally, you've been a leader in multiple different fields, military to tech and business, and now civic engagement. So what universal advice on leadership do you have to offer to our viewers and those aspiring to lead in diverse domains? Are there any lessons or experiences which you'd emphasize?
Yeah, no. I think the older I get, I think the more humble I get about this. And I think that, my first rule of leadership is not to tell anybody how to do it and don't teach it. I think it's something that people see those experiences, they read about it, they witness it, and they learn it themselves. I mean, I think compassion and empathy and inclusion to me are critical aspects of good leadership.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing because just going through many different fields, you have so many things to learn, plus being that leader. It's a really difficult job. So finally, I know that was the last question, but could you just give us your 5 key takeaways from our conversation today?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm incredibly impressed with you, Arya. I mean, this is a great conversation, great prep for this, and I really I love the way you hold these conversations. So kudos to you. Well done. It's interesting. Just as I was reflecting on my career path and where I am now, starting off in the military was a great experience, and you sort of take those lessons learned and that experience, um, and how you apply that throughout your career. I mean, the idea of inclusion and serving underserved or meeting the needs of underserved communities, you do that in the private sector, certainly. I think it's less of a driver than it is within the public sector. You know, democratic government is all about inclusion. Good policy starts with the needs of underserved and marginalized communities. But I think, reflecting on what I'm doing now, supporting the Open Primaries Initiative in Idaho and trying to sort of bring back functional representative government, I think this is one of the most important things I've ever done. And Idaho's a wonderful place. I absolutely love it. It's a small state. It's only 2 million folks, but if we can bring back effective government, if we can get our elections to work again, it's a generational impact. And I think that's what's really exciting, to work with this veterans group, to have conversations with Idahoans across, those that live in the city, those who are out in rural communities, conservative, progressives, and just explain why this initiative will bring back an accountable government that really represents constituents. I think it's just super exciting.
Yep. And do you support kids maybe getting into the military nowadays? I know that this year or last year, the amount of people volunteering to join the military is at kind of a really big low compared to other years.
Yeah, I think service in your community, service to your state, to the country is the critical thing. And I think service can be practiced in a bunch of different ways. Back when I served, there weren't a lot of alternatives like City Year or AmeriCorps or things like that. And there were folks in my platoon that were, they were in the Army to pay for college. They could probably have served in ways other than the Army, but they were doing it nonetheless. And so I'm a big fan of service. The military is unique. You're a professional in destruction, and that's what you do, and you sort of have to mentally and morally be able to deal with that. But I sat on an organization called City Year for over a decade, and it's about service in under-resourced schools across the U.S. It's another great way to serve and be part of a diverse community, and I think that's opportunities like that I really recommend too.
Thank you, and thank you for those takeaways. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks to our viewers for watching this episode of the Exponential Edge podcast, and tune in next week to learn about trends, businesses, and people that will see exponential adoption in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Ari.